Okay, we're back with the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians in chapter 14. And if you remember, at the outset, we covered two verses, one in Ephesians and one in Colossians, where Paul wrote and said, "Be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs." And I posed the question, what is the context? Now, if you've been following these videos, hopefully it's becoming more clear. If it hasn't yet, it should still become more clear before we finish. And I did point out that in those two epistles, the Apostle Paul didn't actually explain the context, which means that the people who received the epistle must have understood what the context was. And so we're trying to see what the early church, under the authority of the apostles, did when they came together or assembled as a church. So that's what these videos are designed to show. And here in chapter 14, 1 Corinthians, Paul goes on to write, "Now I wish that you all spoke in tongues, but even more that you would prophesy. And greater is one who prophesies than one who speaks in tongues, unless he interprets, so that the church may receive edifying." What is the context here, as well as in the 11th and 12th and 13th chapters of this epistle? It's when the believers come together as a church. And the reason that this is important is because if we're going to successfully make Jesus Lord at a church level, not at a personal level, but at a church level, then we have to recognize and acknowledge what the Apostle Paul commanded or called the commandments of the Lord. In other words, you cannot disregard the commandments of the Lord, but then say with your lips, "Lord, Lord." No, that's very clear. It not only is clear for us, it was clear in the days of the Jewish people, when they called God with their lips, but their actions told another story. So if we as a church are going to call Jesus Lord and acknowledge him as head over the church, then we likewise have to acknowledge what he commanded. And so that's why we're covering what the apostle taught, not just in writing to the Corinthians, but as he wrote in chapter 4, verse 17, "My ways in Christ, which I teach everywhere and in every church." So what we see here is not only applicable in Corinth, but it was applicable in Ephesus, Crete, Philippi, Colossia, Derbe, Lystra, Galatia, Antioch, Crete. It was applicable wherever the apostles preached and founded churches. So, in 14, the apostle writes, "Now I wish that you all spoke in tongues, but even more that you would prophesy. And greater is one who prophesies than one who speaks in tongues, unless he interprets, so that the church may receive edifying. Now, brethren, if I come to you speaking in tongues, what will it profit you unless I speak to you either by way of revelation, or knowledge, or prophecy, or teaching?" So, the Apostle Paul is showing that tongues, in the context of the church, is useful through interpretation in imparting revelation, knowledge, prophecy, or teaching. And tongues, in the context of the church, without an interpreter, or without interpretation, is not actually useful in the sense that it does not build anyone up, because the hearer does not understand what is being said. It's very logical. But tongues, accompanied with interpretation, is on par or equivalent with prophecy. And so this, as we'll see in Paul's instructions, necessitates that the members in the church know who has what gift. In other words, for the church to come together, to assemble under the headship of Jesus and through the commands of the apostles, in order to successfully obey the Lord in ministering, in speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, or ministering by the Spirit, the person would need to know, to some degree, who has what gift. In other words, if I have a message in tongues, I need to know when I'm at church, is the interpreter present? The person with the gift of interpretation. If I don't know that, well, how am I going to be useful to the church? So we can see here that Paul's explanation about the body was not just in talk. It was a practical explanation. Anyway, and so the Apostle Paul explains about tongues, and then he says in 14:12, so also, since you are zealous of spiritual gifts, seek to abound for the edification of the church. Therefore, let one who speaks in a tongue pray that he may interpret. And so Paul, in verse 19 and 18 says, I thank God I speak in tongues more than you all. However, in the church, I desire to speak 5 words with my mind, so that I might instruct others also, rather than 10,000 words with the tongue. Context, the coming together of the church. Have you seen anything here about a pastor? I haven't. And we're in 3 chapters to this.